Tell us.
All right, I was born on October the 10th, 1925, in a little town called Cleveland, Georgia, in North Georgia. I've now learned in my old age that that was named for one of my relatives. After the it had been about 1930 when we came to Atlanta.
The whole family moved down?
Well, my daddy had been working down here and more or less commuting up there. He was with the state banking department at that time, and so I'm pretty sure the reason he brought us all down here was because he wanted us to go to the education system down here rather than one up there. So we came here and lived in West End with an aunt of his, my great aunt Minnie. And her, incidentally, son-in-law did go to Tech, named Robert Trussell. We lived over in West End for 3 years. Each school year we would lease a place over there and live there during the school year. And People Street was the name of the school that I attended at that time. After the 3-year period was up, and we had lived at 3 different homes in addition to my great aunt's home, my dad bought a home on what is now called Lenox Road, near the Lenox Square Shopping Center. At that time, of course, it wasn't even named Lenox Road. It was called Fulton Avenue.
Fulton Avenue?
And it was not even paved beyond the railroad.
In fact, that was country, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. They did have the trolleys that ran out. I mean, the old trolleys.
They went out that far?
Well, they had one that stopped in Buckhead, right in the heart of what is Buckhead now, and then one that went on to Oglethorpe, and turned around and came back. Now, those are the trolleys. Those were trackless trolleys. Trackless trolleys came along later, but those are the kind that ran on the metal rails. That's right.
Can you remember that?
Oh, yes, I can remember that very well.
You can see them in your mind?
Oh, sure. That used to be it was a prank back in those days on Halloween to go out and pull the
You never did anything
no,
like that.
I personally didn't. I had a pretty strict parents, and they never did allow me to do that. But they used to soap up cars and all that pretty much, and I think that's all is what's led to this trick-or-treating now. You know, in this day and time, you don't do
those kinds of things anymore. So you lived on what is now Lenox Road, close enough to the trolley line to use that for transportation?
Oh, yes. If you're familiar with Lenox Road at all, it leads off of Peachtree Road, and it goes up a slight hill, and just as you got over the crest of that hill, why, that's where our house was. On the corner at that time was the home of a man named White, who founded White Provision Company, and it was a pretty big estate there. Of course, across this road where Lenox Square proper is right now was the Otley estate. That's where John K. Otley lived. He was a prominent banker in town. I believe he was president of the maybe the First National Bank, which now, of course, has become Wachovia. In fact, he had been kidnapped not too long before we moved out there. We moved out there in 1933 to sort of get you. And I was about 8 years old at that time. I'd finished my kindergarten in the first 2 years, and I entered the 3rd grade in Oriel Hope School, which is located on Piedmont Road, just off of Peachtree. If you know where the intersection of Peachtree Road and Piedmont Road are, then it's just a few hundred yards.
Did you have to walk to school
Well,
from Lenox?
I used to walk quite frequently from Lenox up to there. In fact, those are some of my greatest days. We used to have more fun going back and forth from school. And I learned a lot about the facts of life, too.
That's exactly what happened.
And
Mr. Otley had been kidnapped?
Yes, that's right. He was.
That must have been a big, exciting Atlanta
Well,
story.
of course, at that time, well, sure it was, but I was not really old enough to appreciate that too much. But we used to play over there on his estate because it ran from Peachtree Road all the way back to East Paces Ferry, which is right along the railroad track back at that time. And he liked horses, and he had a lot of horses, and he had a rink where he used to ride, and we used to play football. It made a wonderful football field in the center of that
It sounds like it was a pretty fine life.
Oh, well, it was. And I used to, he had a grandson that was about my age, and we used to play it together over there along with other kids in the neighborhood. And as I say, we used to walk back and forth along Peachtree Road, and at that time, there's nothing but beautiful homes there. Buckhead, as far as the commercial area, was concentrated down about from, well, you wouldn't know where the first, it was Fulton National Bank had a Buckhead Avenue back up to just beyond where the
Roswell Road comes in.
Oh, that's right.
West Paces Ferry and everybody all together there.
That's right.
Yeah. That was the business center at that time?
That was it, right
That
in
was
there.
it.
Right. You didn't get off of Peachtree Road, and it was just during that little area in there. So, yeah, some of my best days were spent, of course, in my grammar school, and we used to roam all those woods and that area out there at that time.
So where did you go to high school then?
Went to North Fulton High School. Well, 1 year to North Fulton High School. That's about 1938, I believe. I graduated, and I remember I was very embarrassed because I was accustomed to wearing short pants, and I think I wore short pants to high school at that time. And I know I wore knickers. I can't remember exactly when I got into long pants, but
That was a sign of growing up when you got long pants.
well, right. But it was sort of embarrassing too, because he had all the other kids had long pants on, and I used to ride my bicycle over there. But getting back to Cleveland now, even after we moved to Atlanta, we would go back and spend the summers in Cleveland. I had, when we finally diagnosed it, we had one of the best man in Atlanta, Dr. Thornton was his name at that time. So anyway, I spent a year really regaining my strength and learning how to walk again. And after that year, my daddy sent me, and I think my brother too at that time, to what's now known as Marist. But at that time it was a military school for boys only, and it was located downtown where the, well, you can change the name. It used to be Ivy Street, where Ivy and Peachtree came together. Sacred Heart Church still stands.
They call it Peachtree Center Avenue now.
Well, anyway, it was adjacent to the Sacred Heart Church.
I know exactly where that is.
And
And it was a military school.
It was a military school, and I was there from 3 years.
Daddy was a disciplinarian, wasn't he?
Oh yes. Oh, I'm glad that he sent me there.
Did you get a good education?
Oh, it was a great education, and that was why he wanted us to go there. He didn't feel like we were getting adequate or as good as he wanted, anyway, in the public schools. So I spent 3 years there. But getting back, you mentioned to Cleveland. When I was in Cleveland, I began to reach the point where I got interested in politics and things like that.
There you were going to high school in downtown Atlanta, pretty close to downtown Atlanta.
Oh yeah, it was right. It was down, no question about it.
When did you start thinking about going to college?
Well,
when did Georgia Tech first cross your
mind? Well, we got into the war, you know, in 1939. Well, we didn't. I mean, that's when Hitler invaded Poland. Mm-hmm. At that time, I was delivering newspapers, the Atlanta Journal, and I used to pick them up there at the corner of Piedmont and Peachtree Road. And my route went back down Piedmont a little bit to East Paces Ferry. Then I came back and went across Peachtree Road down as far as Roswell Road, and then a little bit on Peachtree Road itself. And there was nothing but beautiful homes out there at that time. And incidentally, my school, the grammar school I went to, is where that glass building is located out there now. If you know the big glass building on Piedmont Road near the intersection of Piedmont and Peachtree, that was where my school, R.L. Hope,
Was located.
right. And I had some of the very prominent people in Atlanta as my customers on that route. In fact, the one that was stands out probably as much as any was Walter McElreath, who's the founder of the Atlanta History
Exactly.
Society.
Familiar name
And
to
I
us.
remember vividly
Delivering
that
his paper.
and collecting from him. The delivering the paper was always very pleasant. It's always had to go around and collect and getting put off people have to come back was the chore. But I can remember Mr. McElreath coming there and
Paying
getting his
up,
quarter.
huh?
I think it was about a quarter for a week back in that time.
Imagine.
And then the Troutmans lived on there. That's they were prominent
Attorneys.
lawyers here in Atlanta. That was what's now known as the King and Spalding firm. And and then Philip Weltner. You may be, I don't know whether you know Charlie Weltner, who was a
Recognize.
contemporary of mine. He was in my brother's class. But we went to R.L. Hope School together. And incidentally, E. Rivers was a school still there. It's out there on Peachtree Battle. Those were the two grammar schools back in those days. And you were either a dope from R.L. Hope or Rivers Rat, one or the other.
The kids had names, didn't they?
That's right.
Yeah. When did you start getting any thoughts about Georgia Tech?
Well, getting back to see, it's easy to get off track.